A traditional config manager environment might look something like this. You'll have a primary site server that's serving multiple remote locations. You might have a large remote location that's serving thousands of clients. At that large remote location, you'll have at least 2 distribution points to meet the needs for those clients. At your smaller locations with a few hundred clients, you'll only have 1 distribution point. The distribution point effectively delivers the content that a client needs, whether it's a line of business application, a package, or software updates so that you're meeting your security requirements. A client will request content from the distribution point and save it on its own local cache. If there's a first generation or legacy peer environment already set up, it may request that content from another peer and still save it in its own cache. The problem you run into when an endpoint starts caching content is that the traditional approach to content caching isn't working, and that's because traditional cache uses quotas. If you're setting aside 20 gigs of disk space for ConfigMgr cache on each PC, that means that each end user is losing 20 gigs of disk space on their PC to the cache. The cache doesn't care what other content is filling the disk. It'll happily use 100% of its allocated space if necessary. It's not aware of what the end user is doing and what it might be contributing to or taking away from. As the disk fills over time, the end user suffers from poor performance due to a filled disk. On the other hand, consider a ConfigMgr content library of 2 terabytes. If a client caches only 20 gigs, that means that 20 gigs is 1% of the content library. That means a cache is going to produce a 99% miss. An endpoint is only capable of downloading 1% of the content library at any given time, even if it's downloading the content library from other peers and saving it in its own cache. That means content gets re-downloaded endlessly. The number of servers required in a typical ConfigMgr implementation in an enterprise, from a handful of servers to a couple hundred servers, costs an organization money. We eliminate the need for complex infrastructure by absorbing roles traditionally taken by servers by leveraging client resources without client impact. With Adaptiva technology, you're able to bypass the need for a distribution point by intelligently storing all the content that you need in a self-forming virtual SAN. We're using a proprietary technology that uses unallocated disk space, meaning it's invisible to the OS. What that means for the end user is that there's no noticeable impact. They're not losing any performance and they're not losing any storage space because the operating system is unaware. All free disk space at each location is gathered together to create a virtual SAN. So a small location that only has 10 computers, with each computer having an average free disk space of about 200 gigs, provides enough space for a virtual SAN to create something with 2 terabytes in capacity, meaning your virtual SAN is capable of storing the entire enterprise content library at each location without needing a server infrastructure behind it. Here we have a Windows 10 client. As you can see from WinVer, this is Windows 10 version 1703, or the creator's update. If you look at the properties on the OS volume, we can see that we've used 19 gigs and we've got about 56 gigs free. You can also check this in PowerShell by running the following PowerShell script. Again, the disk has 56 gigs free. In a traditional environment, if you're going to copy anything to this computer, the operating system would mark that space as used, or in other words, you'd see the free disk space start to be reduced. With Adaptiva technology, storing content in unallocated disk space that the OS is unaware of, you're able to store more without having any impact on free disk space. So I'm going to go to my Adaptiva cache on my server, and I'm going to copy this WIM file, which is 3¼ gigs. I'm going to copy it to my Adaptiva cache on my client computer. When the copy finishes, I can open PowerShell and run the same script again. Again, I still have 56 gigs free. And if I go to Properties, you can see again, I have 56.3 gigs free, as you saw before. And now you can see how Adaptiva technology helps to reduce cost and deliver content without an added impact in your environment.